beautiful fall day here in New England. I hope you guys are all enjoying this lovely weather. This is Heather in the NEMA office. Just want to say hi to you guys and get the ball rolling on here. So in that chat feature, if you guys could just type in where you're actually viewing this from, that would be great to see who's with us today. I know we have a lot of new people, which is great. So everybody's typing away there. Houston, nice. We have some distance here. And as you guys are doing that, I just want to let you guys know that today's session and prior lunch with NEMAs have been recorded and are available on the NEMA website. So if you need to, for whatever reason, if you have to click out early or you want to share this presentation, go ahead to the NEMA website and under Lunch with NEMA, you'll be able to see a list of the presentations that have been recorded. And the slide deck will also be available for you to download and view if you would like. Great. We have a big group today, so that's awesome. So I'm going to get the ball rolling on audio descriptions and alt text, making your visual content accessible. I know that's something that I've been thinking quite a bit here as the person in charge of the NEMA website. So I'm going to leave it to Sarah Sims, the Director of Visitor Engagement and Accessibility at the Missouri Historical Society, and Abbie Diaz, Director of Education at the Wisconsin Maritime Museum. So I'm going to turn it over to the two of you guys.
Thanks, Heather. Welcome, everybody. Again, my name is Sarah Sims, and I am the Director of Visitor Engagement and Accessibility at the Missouri Historical Society. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And just a little tiny bit about my background. I have an MA in Museum Studies. I started as a classroom teacher and started out in K-12 education in museums, and now work with accessibility, volunteers and interns, and then frontline visitor engagement staff. Abbie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. My name's Abbie. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the Director of Education and Public Programs at the Wisconsin Maritime Museum, and I'm also a certified ADA coordinator. Just a little bit additional information. I've been in museums for about 10 years, and I'm also the caregiver to a young man with disabilities, which really shapes the way that I see access in cultural institutions. So thanks so much for having a non-New Englander here today.
This is Heather.
And I'm in St. Louis.
So I forgot to mention earlier, this is Heather. If you guys do have any questions at all, go ahead and type them into the chat feature, and then I can ask Sarah or Abbie any of those questions. So, okay, I will let you guys go back.
All right, great. All right, so just a quick rundown of our agenda for the presentation today. We're going to start out with talking about audio description, what it is, a brief how-to. Then we'll move into the same with alt text and image descriptions, what that is, a brief how-to. We'll be sharing resources for both of those. Then we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about describing aspects of identity and questions around that. And then we'll end with Q&A, and like Heather said, you can type questions at any time, and then Heather will kind of field those and rephrase them for us at the end so that we can be sure to answer any questions. And I believe we have our email addresses at the end, so you can feel free to reach out to either of us privately afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with audio description. You see on there AD with 3 parentheses marks. That's the kind of international symbol for audio description. So when you see that at a cultural institution, you know that audio description is being provided. So what is audio description and a little bit of history? So this is an accessibility feature primarily for the blind and low vision community. Although as we go throughout this, hopefully you will see how this accessibility feature actually improves access for everybody, because accessibility is, of course, just it's good for everyone. It initially began in TV, movies, theater, dance, opera, things like that, kind of live performances. But in more recent years, it has been expanding into museums, onto social media, and then my favorite sporting events, our local hockey club, the St. Louis Blues, who just won the Stanley Cup. They have audio description at actually quite a few of their games, which is pretty cool. Audio description can be live, so that in the moment with a trained narrator narrating what's happening on screen or on stage or during a tour, or it can be written and recorded, so providing it either in a label or on a tour. I'm going to play a quick video so that you can kind of just see and hear what audio description is like, and then I'll talk more about it, but I always think it's nice to just kind of start with an experience. So here, probably many of you recognize this show, but here's an example.
Just watch a movie and close your eyes, and you can't follow most movies with just listening. Be like, who's that? What's going on?
Police lights flash in front of the buyer's house as Officer Callahan stands outside with Joyce and Jonathan.
Audio description is a description of the action that's going on in between the dialogue.
Inside the dark house, Hopper walks down the hallway with a flashlight.
For blind people, having that audio description, it becomes their eyes.
I definitely say Orange is the New Black, Stranger Things and Game of Thrones have been my audio description highlights.
11 closes her eyes. Elsewhere in the lab, the man from the photo sits at a table with a piece of paper.
I can't see anything at all. So actually, I've never had audio description on life, as it were. So having it on TV is a great start.
I use it for watching TV programs, for films at home, films in the cinema.
Theatre and cinema are my favourites.
I use audio description when I go to football matches.
A lot of those little subtleties in the way a person looks or something they do with their hands is actually a massive part of the story.
11 steps out wearing the dress and wig. Lucas gives Dustin an impressed look as Mike gawks at her.
If it's a gentle film, they'll have perhaps a gentler voice.
Blinks, tilting his head.
And in the action films, they'll have a harder edge description.
It drags dried growth and a piece of shepherd's suit across the floor, leaving behind a trail of blood.
All that tension, a lot of that is based in seeing what's happening and getting a sense of the atmosphere, and that's really brought to life as well by audio description.
I don't watch anything without audio description.
I'm an absolute addict of audio description. I OD on AD.
For more information, call the RNIB helpline on 0303 123 9999 or visit audiodescription.org.uk.
All right, so hopefully that gave you kind of a good idea of what audio description is. I also really like the audio description from the Circle of Life opening scene from The Lion King, and that's another really great example. So after this webinar, you can go and Google that. It'll come right up for you and give you another great example of how audio description happens in kind of the TV or movie format. But as you heard from that video, it's basically what audio description is doing is it's making visual material accessible to people who are blind. And so you could see how that's important in TV or movies, but of course in museums that's really important too, because museums are very visual places. We have visual arts, we have artifacts, we have environmental treatments in our museum, and visuals are really important to understanding the context. So it's making that accessible to all of our visitors. And the goal is with audio description is not to interpret what is happening, it's purely to give them the visual details so that your blind or low vision visitors can then make their own interpretations. And so that's really important, a really important distinction to make is that when you are providing audio description, whether it's live or whether you have written it in a label or in an audio tour, that you aren't making an interpretation, that you're just providing those visual details. So audio description in museums can take a couple of different formats. As I mentioned, it could be in the form of a tour, in which case you would be providing audio descriptive information about the artifacts and galleries that you're in, as well as maybe some content or, doing interpretive strategies, activities, things like that. But you're providing that audio description as an addition to the tour. It might be in the form of labels. I'm going to show you an example here in a couple of slides of a audio descriptive label that we have in a exhibit that we have up right now at the Missouri History Museum. And then you might also have audio description in digital content. So if your museum has an Instagram or a blog or something like that that you're sharing images of, you might provide alt text of those, which Abbie's going to share more about later. But you might also decide to provide longer form audio description of your visual content that you're sharing digitally. So I apologize for this next slide having a lot of text, and as Heather said, this will be available to you after the webinar, so you can kind of go back and read over these things. This is a photograph that appears in a photographic exhibit that we have up right now. And this slide and the one following it are the content label, so the label that the curator wrote. I won't read the whole thing, but if you look at the last sentence on this slide, it says, in this image, Percy Green is shown being arrested after the 4-hour protest. So this is really the only sentence in the whole content label, which is this slide and the next slide. And so if you can imagine being a visitor who is blind or has low vision, perhaps you have a screen reader on your phone, so you're able to read the content label or the curatorial label, and you get information about what the protest was about. You get information about the aftermath with the lawsuit, et cetera, but you might be wondering, well, what's actually happening in this picture? And the only sentence that tells you about that, again, is that last one in this slide. In this image, Percy Green is shown being arrested. Well, I've seen a couple of arrests in my lifetime, and those can look really different each time. So what we did was we then wrote an audio descriptive label that is provided in the gallery along with the content label. And it's, again, a couple of slides. I won't read the whole thing to you, but you can see here that we provide information about the photograph itself. We do name Percy Green, and that the setting is the arch, even though you don't see the arch in the background. We provide information about how the photograph was taken from a bird's eye view. We provide information about who is in the photograph and their relationship to each other. So Percy Green in this photo is actually laying limp, making it much more difficult for the police officers to arrest him. They have to kind of lift his body onto a stretcher in this case. So this is supplemental information to the content label so that a visitor who is blind can more fully interpret this photograph and the meaning behind it. So it goes on. It's a pretty lengthy description because this is in written format, and I'll kind of talk about guidelines here in a second. But yeah, again, talking about information about what they're wearing, things like that. All right. So in audio description, what should you describe? There's a million different things, right? In photographs, works of art, three-dimensional artifacts. What do you decide to describe, and what do you decide not to describe? So it depends. It depends on your media. Right now, most audio description is usually just provided for photographs and paintings. So that's what I'm going to kind of go off of here, although many of these guidelines still ring true if you're describing a three-dimensional object. You should describe colors, names of people, any text that appears in the image, emotions, expressions, actions, the setting, any important detail that would provide that context, right? Because as we are processing visual information as sighted visitors to museums, that those details help us make those interpretations and help us understand the context of the image or the artwork that we're looking at. If you are describing three-dimensional artifacts, you might want to describe things like size, shape, and texture. If you are describing original documents, you might want to describe the quality of the handwriting, the quality of the paper, any damage to it. If you are describing an overall gallery space, so the format, the layout of the gallery, what else is in there, what is it evoking? If you are on an audio descriptive tour, you might want to also provide directional information. So what's in front of you, what's behind you, what are you approaching, things like that. So things you should avoid, long over descriptions, and of course this depends on your format. If you are doing a live interpretation, you want to keep your, or a live audio description, you want to keep your descriptions pretty short because you also want to provide time for questions, conversation, content, things like that. If you have a written audio description, those might be able to be a bit longer because the visitor can then choose how much of it they want to read. They can go at their own pace, etc. You want to avoid including your own interpretation because remember, this is an accessibility feature meant to provide the visitor with all necessary information so that they can make their own interpretation of the artwork or the photograph or the galleries that they're being presented with. Obvious details. So here's an example. Even though this is for the blind and low vision community, they still exist out there in the world, right? And so a school bus, even though they may not be able to physically see a school bus, they've all had experiences with school buses. So you don't need to go to the extent to describe that it's a long car with, you know, so many seats and it's yellow and this and that. You can just say school bus because they do have the context for understanding what that is. Now, if the school bus happens to be really different and it's painted with a mural on the side of it, then you would maybe describe the mural. The other reason why you don't have to describe obvious details is that the vast majority of people who are blind were not born blind. So even though they might currently have low or no vision, they at one point in their life, the majority of them, of course not everyone, were sighted and so did have that experience. Finally, details that are not in focus, you don't want to describe those if you cannot physically see them. Other tips: being concise, being consistent. So we are currently working on an audio descriptive style guide for the Missouri Historical Society. It's a work in progress, but it's important to be consistent, so we're working on that. Planning ahead for live tours. I have given a couple of live audio descriptive tours. They are difficult, I will say, and winging it makes it much more difficult. So plan ahead for that. And knowing your audience. So again, what is their schema? I like to use the example of, a Christmas tree. So most people in America know what a Christmas tree is, so you wouldn't have to describe it. If you were working with a particular group whose backgrounds did not involve the American Christian tradition, maybe you would need to describe what a Christmas tree looks like. So knowing your audience is important. Finally, where to find more information. The top two bullet points, the American Council for the Blind's Audio Description Project and then Art Beyond Sight are the two leading organizations in the field of audio description, and they have a wealth of information on those websites there. Finally, I included the information of a woman named Kim Carlson who does plenty of audio description training in the New England area. I don't personally know her because I am not in that area, but she came recommended to me from the main audio description training provider here in the Midwest. So I would recommend reaching out to her if you want to pursue further training for your staff or volunteers in audio description. So I believe, yep, that is it for audio description for now, and I'm going to transfer it over to Abbie to talk about alt text and image description.
Great, thank you, Sarah. So again, my name is Abbie, and we're just going to be talking about similar topics, but a little bit different, a little bit shorter. So alt text is short embedded text that's embedded into the metadata of your image. So it's not visible, but it can be picked up by screen readers and also by search engines. So alt text makes sense for accessibility reasons, but it's also just a great idea for your website. For those of us that think about SEOs and how to get higher up on lists of search engines, they search through alt text, and that'll help visitors get to your site a little bit easier. So alt text makes visual elements accessible digitally. The goal is to describe and provide a little bit of context for the image. The difference between describing the image on AD and writing alt text is this is much more concise. So this is about 125 characters, about half a tweet in length, and it describes just the essential information about an image. Similar to audio description, you're transcribing any words that are in that image because a screen reader can't read the words that are in a JPEG, for example. So you need to write out those words. So when I'm writing alt text, I consider, why did I put this image where it is? What would a sighted person get from this image? And then I condense that into my alt text. So it's the really essential information. So I have an example here, providing a little bit more context. So this is, by definition, a red bullseye, but many of us know that if I had this on my website, it might be instead a logo for Target, the best store in the whole country. So I would say instead that this is a Target logo. And if this was linking to Target's website, I would also say that. So I'm telling a screen reader that this is a link to go somewhere else, and telling a screen reader that this is a red bullseye is accurate, but also misleading, because in the context of my website, I'm maybe referring to corporate sponsors on a corporate sponsorship page. So this is to Target. So where you would use alt text is anywhere that you're using images online. So that's your website, that's Twitter, Facebook, any digital PDFs that you have uploaded. It also includes memes, videos, GIFs, graphs, charts, data spreads. When you start to add in descriptions for some of these more complicated things like graphs and charts, there's something called long descriptions. So they're a little bit different, so that you would describe all the data in a chart. Why did I put this chart in my document? You would describe that in a longer description, but it's similar to embedding alt text. Where not to use alt text is just decorative objects. So I work at a maritime museum. We have lovely maritime waves. If I'm not communicating anything by just using decoration, I'm going to purposefully leave an empty alt text so that screen readers aren't getting bogged down by reading all of the elements on my page. If they're decorative elements, you don't need to describe. Image descriptions can be a little bit longer than alt text, and they describe in more details. So you might have seen on social media somebody having a caption for a photo, and then they will say image : or image description, and it's about the length of a tweet, and it's just describing a little bit more detail. So it's alt text plus some. So this is, again, really similar to audio description on things that we would describe and not describe. Emotions, the essential information about an image. We don't need to describe the young boy has 2 eyes, 1 nose, a mouth. We can just say the young boy did something. So similar to audio description and the do's and don'ts of what we're describing, we're just making it more concise. Again, about the length of a tweet for our image descriptions. The image descriptions, unlike alt text, are publicly seen. So I might add in alt text and also put in image description, which does a dual purpose of raising awareness for why we do image descriptions and alt text. So when I've done this on social media, I've had people ask, why do you do that? And it's a great teachable moment to tell people why it's important that they're describing their images. So here's a great example from Facebook. This is my brother, and he had a black cat on his shoulder jump off of the staircase onto him, and he's startled. So to add in alt text to Facebook, under the image options, you would just change alt text. And what's nice about Facebook is you can go back and add in image descriptions and alt text. So you say you've posted in the past couple of years and you have your most popular photos. I would go back in and add alt text and image descriptions for those, especially if they're things that you share or reuse often. It's not always the case that you can go backwards and add in afterwards. So again, this is on Facebook, just going to the image options, and there's an change alt text option there. Facebook recently announced that they're going to auto-generate alt text, which is a great thing to say, but it's not great. So this generated alt text, before I changed it for the image of my brother, was boy, outside, and beard. So 1 out of 3 is not great for an audio or for alt text. So we're inside, he is beardless, and it is a boy. So I think by Facebook saying that, it's maybe helping people feel sort of complacent about this, because you think, oh, Facebook is doing it for me. But it's really important to check, because this is in fact harmful to people with screen readers, because this is totally misrepresenting what my photo is, which is a hilarious, unmissable photo. So I embedded alt text into this image, and then I added an image description that says, Daniel is standing in front of Abbie's staircase and was frightened by Kobe, the black kitten that just jumped from the staircase to his shoulder. Because this is my personal Facebook page, my brother Daniel is the #1 thing that I post about. So I don't need to go through and describe Daniel every time. My Facebook friends and my personal circle will understand what I'm saying. He's my own little celebrity. On Twitter, you have to first enable the ability to be able to even add alt text. So under settings, general, you will click on the accessibility tab, and I have a screenshot of that here. And you have to check the box that says compose image descriptions. So it's adding on a little bit of effort to even be able to add in alt text to your tweets. Once you do that, you will see that you're able to add in alt text. So here's my description for this close-up picture of Daniel. And once it's added, on the final tweet on the bottom left corner, you'll see ALT, indicating that alt text has been added. And at the bottom of the photo, in grayed out words, you'll see the start of the alt text or image description that I added to that. So first for Twitter, you need to enable the ability to be accessible, and then you'll be able to, as you're posting, see the option to add in alt text. Just as you're posting, it'll appear as an option. So just to reiterate, you can see the ALT at the bottom, indicating that alt text has been added. You cannot go back and re-add image descriptions or alt text to things that you've already tweeted, just like you can't go back and edit tweets in general. And currently at this time, Twitter is not enabling you to describe videos or GIFs on their platform. But I'm sure that those things are coming as we use them more and more on social media. So right now it's only images that you are able to describe. On Instagram, you'll go under your advanced settings during the final step of posting your photo. So right before you click post, there's an option that says advanced settings. And at the bottom under accessibility, it says write alt text. And you can add it in after posting as well on Instagram, which is very helpful. So as you're looking at the photo on Instagram, there are 3 dots on the top right of the photo. If you click those, your options will open. You'll edit the photo and see it pop up, the option to add in. So Twitter is the only platform of these 3 that you're unable to go backwards and add in afterwards. So I have an example, and the volume is not great on this. So when Heather brings up the video, I'm going to ask that you all turn up your volume. I've never screen recorded before, so this was a new experience. But when you're ready to test out what using a screen reader is like, there's a voiceover option on most smartphones. So this is a screen recording of my iPhone. So under settings, general accessibility, it's called voiceover with iPhones. And this will read, similar to a screen reader, all the alt text that's embedded. So again, when we press play, please turn up your volume so that you're able to hear what an experience is on Instagram for someone using a voiceover.
Okay, volume's up.
Image may contain outdoor image. Excellent museums, my weekend is booked. Back button, back button. Excellent back button. Excellent back button. Photo by excellent museums. In a baseball hat and t-shirt. Has his head in his hands as he looks over from the balcony in wonder at the lower level of the field museum. Dozens of people are below him as is the skeleton of a stegosaurus. Image.
All right, volume's back down. So for those of you, I'm so sorry about the volume length. I'm still learning how to screen record, but I had an Instagram photo without an image description. So Instagram said photo might be outside, which was true, but it didn't pick up that it was a stack of library books, what the books were, things like that. And then I did describe an image of Daniel at the Field Museum overlooking the lower level. And so it shows you a little bit of how the screen reader not only works within an iPhone, which I think is important to know, but how it picked up the alt text, how that reads, how it sounds, and also that it also will read the captions when you click on the captions. So in your alt text, you don't need to repeat what you said in your captions. That's just repetitive. It's a totally different thing, describing things that somebody who is sighted would pick up in that. And my captions, always hilarious, are a different thing. So when you are ready to get started, I have similar advice to that of Sarah. You really want to consider putting together a style guide for your organization. You want to keep the same lengths, the same detail levels, using the same voice, using the same vocab for your museum audience, if this is for a museum or a historical organization. Similar to Sarah with audio description, you really want to know your audience or who you're trying to reach. So the way I would describe an image to a child is different than what I might say on Instagram. So know who's reading the post, who's looking at your post, what their age, their vocab are. Make alt text writing and writing image descriptions a part of your formal process. So if you're using something like Sprout Social, or you plan out your posts in even an Excel sheet, add in that column for alt text so it's always in the forefront of your mind that this is just an inherent part of what you do now, is adding in alt text and image descriptions. And the best way to get started with anything is just to get started. If you are doing nothing, you're doing nothing. So it's better to do it and get user feedback. I recommend partnering with people who are blind, use screen readers, or have low vision, so they can give you some targeted feedback on how your descriptions are going and what you could improve upon. Any feedback is good feedback, especially when they are people with a lived experience. So now I think, Sarah, do you want to pick up this and I'll jump in as we're chatting about how we're going to describe aspects of identity?
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, so describing identity is something that is still evolving with best practices right now in the audio description and alt text community. As you know, issues of identity and various other subfields within the museum is also evolving. So best practices we maybe aren't there yet. I guess a better way that we could have put this is just like current practice, because it is still being developed and adapted. Currently, though, right now, you should only identify race, gender, or other aspects of identity when it is known or when it is important to the context and interpretation of the artwork or the photograph or the object. So for example, and I can go back to this, and I'm sorry to jump around, I should have added this slide again. But in the audio descriptive label that we wrote for this particular photograph, Percy Green is African American, and we note that. We also note that the other people in the picture who are arresting him are white. I think that's actually on the next. Sorry, I'm scanning this. Oh, we don't. Do we? No, we don't. So here's an example of how our style guide here at the Missouri Historical Society is ever evolving. But if I were to go back and write this again, I would probably not only mention that the central figure, Percy Green, is African American, but that the four men around him are white, because the context of this photograph is that Percy Green is protesting racially discriminatory hiring practices by the construction company constructing the arch back in the 1960s. So this is a part of the ongoing civil rights movement here in St. Louis and in the United States. So race is important to this context. Let me jump back to our slide.
So Sarah, someone did comment that you actually did mention that it was on the first slide, the four men.
Sorry.
Yeah, so it was there.
Thanks. My multitasking skills are not great. Thank you for pointing that out, though. But Abbie and I want to also note that this raises problems and questions, because who decides what is essential for interpretation, right? So I, as a white woman, was making the call that race was important to the context of that particular photograph, and I might make the call that it's not important to another photograph, and I have to acknowledge that that is very problematic, right? So that's just to say that that again, these practices are still being developed and looked at from a variety of perspectives. But right now, it is important to be consistent, and I would also add to this to be transparent. So as we at the Missouri Historical Society are continuing to develop our style guide, that's something that we are thinking about. How do we also share that with our visiting communities, to be transparent about, like, you know, we're deciding to describe identity in these contexts and not in these and not in other contexts, just so that, you know, we can open ourselves to feedback from the communities that we serve. Abbie, do you want to add anything to this?
I think just as a note of caution, I just would advise, if you are describing race, and I think there's a case to be made that race is important for interpretation, that you're not only describing it when people that are non-white are in the image. So that sort of shows that white is the default, and that's not the case. So again, with consistency, if you're describing race, you're describing race. You're not only doing it when there are people of color in the photo, American Indians or Black Americans, things like that. And that's the same for gender as well. If you're only describing when there's women in the photo, or ability levels, things like that, any important aspect of identity, you really need to check your own bias. And that's why it's important that these descriptions aren't being written by just one person all the time without anyone else looking at them, because humans always have bias. So having a group that's reading through them or having a style guide to lean on is super essential, because it's really easy to not realize that you're making biased choices.
Thank you. Cool. So that was all we had, but I know that some questions have been brought up in the chat function. These are our email addresses. And then Heather, I guess, do you want to field questions?
Yep, so we do have quite a bit. So I will start with you, Sarah, since they're the first ones that came in. Do you ever feel pushback from your exhibits collection department to include additional labels in the galleries? If so, how do you resolve that? And the second follow-up is, how big should they be, and how big of the space should they go into?
Yeah, so and I should have clarified that earlier. So right now, our audio descriptive labels are not on the wall. They are in little kind of spiral bound packets that then we have 7 of them kind of scattered in different places throughout the exhibit in little pockets. So of that, let me think. I'm going to probably get the numbers here, but that exhibit has about 70 to 75 photographs, and 26 of them are audio described. And so all 26 of those audio descriptions are bound in one little booklet. And then, like I said, 7 copies of that booklet are provided throughout the space. And then we use that AD parenthesis, 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 that icon is on the actual curatorial wall label, so that a visitor could identify, okay, this label or this photograph does have additional audio descriptive text, and then they could go to that booklet to pull it out to read that text. So we're not taking up additional wall space, I guess, is the main answer to that. And we have very little pushback from our exhibit team when it comes to most accessibility features. We have an internal accessibility committee on which both of our exhibit designers serve on that committee, and so they're very committed to making sure that their exhibit design incorporates accessible features. And we really work together to make sure that we are providing new accessibility features but not taking up too much real estate. The other way that we are providing audio description, which is actually being debuted in our next temporary exhibit that's opening in November, is with kiosks. So starting with that new exhibit, all new temporary exhibits that we have will have 3 kiosks in each, kind of scattered throughout the exhibit floor plan. And then at those kiosks, the audio description will be recorded, so someone can kind of pick up that little phone and listen to the audio description. So again, it's not on the wall, specifically because we know that real estate in exhibits is at a premium. We are also exploring working with a company called Culture Connect to do a variety of things with mobile guides that has different accessibility features so that audio description can be read through the mobile guides as well, but that's kind of several years out right now. And then in terms of length, because we're not printing it on the wall, that size isn't really a factor, but for us, if it's being recorded, so in the kiosks, we try to keep to between 1 and 3 minutes per audio description, depending on the piece itself. If it's a large panoramic photo with a ton of details, it might be more closer to the 3 minutes. If it's a smaller photograph or small object, it might be a minute. With written text, again, it depends on the detail. We try to keep it to a page or a half a page, just because we know that people don't want to read, 100 pages when they come into the museum. So hopefully that answers your question.
So Sarah, just to clarify, the printed guide, I've visited you at your museum. So the printed guides are for the sighted guides that are with somebody or for an interpreter in this space. So the people who are blind or low vision will have someone reading the text to them. I think I saw somebody asking how that works. So
yeah.
Right?
So right now, so those printed texts would have, in the current exhibit, it's not recorded. So you would have to read that text. And so it would be a sighted companion who is with the visitor who's blind, or many people do on their smartphones have apps that if you hold it up to text, it'll kind of read it aloud to you. But that's a flaw in our current exhibit, of course, is that the accessible feature is not fully accessible. But, with each new exhibit, we try to add additional accessibility features to make sure that it is fully accessible. And so that's why at our next exhibit, we will provide the additional feature of that kiosk so that someone can pick up that phone and hear the audio description read aloud to them. I should also say that we are starting to have accessibility maps at the beginning of all of our exhibits, so that a visitor can walk in and see kind of the floor plan and the layout of the gallery and where accessibility features are located. So that would include things like audio description, it would include where touchables are located, it would include where videos with open captioning are located, et cetera, et cetera. And those labels right now are not raised and don't have Braille, but the next iterations will, of course, to make them more accessible.
So I've even used, I worked in some smaller institutions. So when we've made a tactile map, when I was testing it out, I would just take the blueprint and then trace it with hot glue to add in a little bit of a tactile where things were located in the room. And that was a great way to pilot things if you don't have the budget to get things prototyped and made. Hot glue.
So the Braille question has actually come up a couple times. Do you guys have you ever seen actual Braille in the descriptions?
So I'm glad that somebody brought up Braille, and I want to mention that it is always good to have multiple accessible features. Not everybody reads Braille, but a lot of people do. Similar to the deaf community, some people read lips, some people prefer open captioning, some people prefer ASL interpretation. So the more options you can have, the better. Right now, we only have Braille for for 6 of the audio descriptive text, and again, that's a space issue as well as a cost issue. Internally, we have an audio description team. I had a trainer come in and train 15 of our staff members cross-departmentally. So we write the audio description in-house, so that is, very low cost to us. We paid for the training, but now every time we produce audio description, we do it in-house, which is great. But then, Braille, of course, would be an additional cost. So we definitely budget that in where we can, but we aren't always able to have Braille for everything, unfortunately. But that was one way that that was something that I prioritized, was getting folks in-house trained in audio description so we could at least provide audio description for all of our exhibits, even where we don't have budget to maybe provide other features.
Okay, and there was another kind of follow-up with that one. You did mention smartphones with apps and stuff like that, but what if they don't have a smartphone to actually listen to the audio? Do you ever have devices that they could borrow, or would that be more of the audio guide type situation?
At the Missouri History Museum, our audio guides are very out of date, and that's something that we're currently working on for the upcoming decade. I mentioned we're hopefully working with Culture Connect to do a variety of things for us, but one of those is to get a new mobile app, and then actually have a couple of new mobile devices for visitors who don't come in with their own smartphone. We recognize that is an accessibility barrier as well. So currently, no, but in the future, yes. And Abbie, I don't know what you all have.
We are working towards getting audio guides, but what's nice now is that we're able to think about access right from the beginning of the creation of our tour. So along with doing an audio tour, I'm also going to at the same time do an audio description tour through the main highlights of our gallery.
Okay, Abbie, I do have a question for you. Who's in charge of adding all the alt text to your institution's social media posts? Because I know that's talked about quite a bit.
Yeah.
Is it marketing? Is it you? Is it the intern?
So we, at this point, we're a pretty small institution. So it wasn't being done. And now I'm taking that role on as sort of the museum's ADA coordinator. So I've started going back and adding them in. And then we are in the process of formalizing so that it will get written. So if we're in a shared Google Excel sheet, as they're planning posts, I'm adding in alt text and image descriptions with the hopes that I can bring in somebody similar to what Sarah did and get multiple people trained. But at this point, I'm the person that will be responsible for ensuring social media accessibility.
No, because I've heard of other museums having, they spend an entire day as the entire staff, some of the smaller organizations, redoing some of their website to include that. So follow up on this one is something that I actually try to do on the NEMA emails is adding the alt text to the emails. That's probably a good thing.
It is. It's a great thing. And also making sure that what I love is when images are, a lovely little graphic, like an invite, but your alt text has to have the words, or somebody who is using a screen reader will get an empty JPEG, basically.
Yep.
So if you're using, our museum uses MailChimp, so it's really easy as you're adding in the image and you're embedding the image into your newsletter, there's already a box ready there for alt text. So adding that in right as you're creating your newsletter is super easy to do. And I think for any museum educators that are on this, and that's where Sarah and I's background is, learning how to do audio description and alt text just, I think, makes you a better educator. It makes you look at things in a way that you've never looked at them before. And I find myself using techniques in audio description as I'm teaching everybody. So it's sort of that universal design, is it just makes you better at realizing what you're teaching and being more intentional about the things that you're communicating. So I would recommend, even if you are not in charge of your social media, thinking about it and being an advocate for this in your institution.
So another follow-up on that one is, do you know which social media platforms as a whole are further ahead on accessibility, or to put it another way, are blind, low vision people more drawn to one platform over another because of the accessibility?
Not that I'm aware of. Sarah, do you have any insight into this?
I don't know.
I'm not sure one way or the other. I think that on Twitter in particular, there's a great community of people with disabilities that that all follow the same best practices, and it's a great community to learn from. And I assume that a lot of people use Twitter because of the community aspect. So that's where I see the most resources.
So the one question that's kind of come up, and I know you guys talked about it earlier, is about style guides. Is there anything that you could point to at the moment, or is it more of something that is currently being made?
Yeah, so I would say, like, audio description in museums, as I kind of mentioned at the beginning, is relatively new. So they're probably, I don't know for sure, but my guess is that most museums are just starting to get trained in this and just starting to kind of dip their toe into it. And a lot of them, I assume, probably don't have a specific audio description style guide. We are working on one, and I would be happy, my email is up there, I would be happy to share our current working draft. I also saw a question on there about sharing an accessibility map. I would also be happy to share pictures of our in-gallery accessibility maps with anybody who wants to see those. You can just shoot me an email for that. I would say, now this is not about an audio descriptive style guide, but I think both the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the MoMA have really great sensory maps and social narratives, which we're not talking about right here, but those are easily accessible on their websites if you want to see examples of that. And they both, I think, are doing a great job in the art museum world of, you know, all different accessibility features. So I would check them out. But yeah, as far as audio description styles guide goes, I'd be happy to share our working draft.
Okay, and then Abbie, do you have any accounts that might be helpful, like on Twitter, to maybe further the education on social media accessibility?
Yeah, absolutely. If I compiled a little list, Heather, is there a way that we could send out to people?
Yep, I can actually make it easy and have everybody go to the NEMA website.
Yeah, I'll compile a list of my favorites and the who to follow, especially as they relate to cultural institutions. And echoing Sarah, I think that Shed Aquarium is also doing some really incredible access work. They do live audio description of some of their animal shows. They have a sensory-friendly app. They have a wonderful accessibility manager. So I think they're also leading the charge in sort of this museum, theater, aquarium hybrid. And I look to them for a lot of resources in this realm as well.
Okay, so there was a question on actual videos. How do you do the audio descriptions on that one? I know we actually did have a lunch with NEMA that did mention that, and they said basically do not use YouTube's audio descriptions because that does not work, or their translator.
Yeah, sorry, so the question was, how do you do audio description and video? Right?
Yeah.
Okay, and we haven't done this at the History Museum. We haven't audio described video as of yet, but you would be essentially just doing an additional audio recording. So you'd have, you know, another that you would overlay on top of whatever video you're having, which I am not a tech person, so I don't know the technicalities of that, but you would want to either hire someone, or if you have someone internal who would write and then be the voice of your audio description, and then, you know, recording that and working with your tech team to integrate those videos. But yeah, you would not want to just use the YouTube feature. You would want to have somebody trained to write an audio descriptive text. And with that live interpretation, hopefully you got this from the video, but you have to describe when there's a lull in the song or the actual dialogue in the video. So that's why live interpretation is actually really difficult, because you have to get the most important description in when you have those dialogue breaks, because you obviously cannot be describing over top of dialogue, or else nobody's going to hear anything.
So a question did come up, because we do have quite a few small museums out there with very small staff. How much extra time do you usually add into your schedule to do all these things? I mean, just on the very basic level.
Yeah. Abbie, do you want to take that, because I know you're at a smaller institution?
Yeah, so we have a really small staff, less than 10 full-time. So I will be honest in that it's difficult, and it's sort of making a case for inclusion at your institution, and that this is important. But as you get better at audio description and writing alt text, right, when I first started, it took more time because I was learning, but now it really comes a lot faster. And so for alt text in particular, or image descriptions, it becomes second nature, just like using any social media platform takes a while to learn. It's just learning those new accessible features. So now I'm much quicker at it than I was before. So I just incorporate that into the time that I spend on social media for my institution. It's not a significant amount more.
Okay, so we just hit the 1 o'clock hour, so I just want to put the link in there for our survey before everybody checks out. Does anybody have any questions, final questions and stuff for Abbie and Sarah? I know we covered a lot of ground today. I see typing. I just want to say thank you to Abbie and Sarah for presenting today and for everybody joining us. Lunch with NEMA is a free resource on the last Wednesday of every month, except November and December, due to holidays. Lots of thank yous. So as I mentioned earlier, today's webinar will be available on the NEMA website, and then any additional resources that Sarah and Abbie mentioned earlier, we can also link on the website later on this afternoon. So it looks like a lot of thank yous.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks for joining.
So I think we're wrapping up then. So I wish you guys to join us in October for our Lunch with NEMA there. We'll be talking about museum branding with Emily Robertson. As always, we'd love to see you in November at the NEMA Annual Conference in Burlington, Vermont. And we hope to see you guys soon at a webinar, in-person workshop, or at conference. Thanks, everybody.